Thank you for that introduction, and thank you to Dan and the team at the Lunchtime Lectures for inviting me here today to talk about one of my passions, which is robots, and somebody else's passion too. I don't normally talk without notes, so I'm going to do my best to try and describe what my research is about, and if something's not clear, we can talk about it afterwards, or you can contact me in the Department of Anthropology. So first of all, I chose this image very deliberately. I'm going to tell you more about it when we go through the talk. But you can see this kind of metallic object here, R.U.R. emblazoned across the chest, and a worker kneeling down in front of it. And someone has quite carefully placed the hand on the head of this, this worker. And so, you know, we kind of, for some reason, have these psychic associations, if you like, between robots and destruction and the end of the world and things. And so what I'm hoping to do in this talk is talk about some of the backdrop to that, why do we think about robots in that way, but also begin to think about, well, what's actually going on in robotics, and do we need to worry about them taking over the world. So this is a kind of object that you're probably all familiar with when you hear the term robot, but I'm going to show you the very, very first robots. These were the very first robots. They were characters in a play in the 1920s called Rossum's Universal Robots. And the play was written by a Czech writer called Karel Capek. And basically, these robots, you know, people tend to think of robots as kind of cute, cuddly toys, or, you know, Hollywood depictions kind of devoid of politics. But the first robots were actually created and imagined in a time of absolute political turmoil. You just had the First World War, you know, finished. That had a devastating impact across Europe, and so people were kind of reflecting on what does it mean to be human, what makes us human, those kind of questions. And this kind of context is what inspired Capek to kind of write this play. And interestingly, these robots, being human, they are actually in the play assembled on a production line, a bit like the Ford manufacturing production line. So even though they are human, they are assembled, and these robots are designed to labor, and that is their primary purpose in society. So then what happens when Karel Capek writes this play and it starts to be reproduced in Paris, London, and New York, other artists start to take this robot image and they start to reproduce it in their own particular ways. And they start to, interestingly, turn this robot character into a machine. And I love the fact that this robot's called Eric. You know, we tend to think of Cybertron or, you know, kind of funky names for robots, but this one was just called Eric. And it was made by Captain Richardson, Reffell. And as you can see, it's kind of, this robot was just a simple mechanical object. It could stand up, it could move its arm up and down. So very simplified, you know, kind of movements. But, you know, you can see, I mean, it looks I think it looks pretty incredible myself. So we have this kind of, this robot becoming machine-like, which is starting to distance itself more and more and more from this kind of human character that was in the first play. So what kind of made the robot turn into a machine? Well, you've got to remember, around the return of the century, particularly in the 1920s, there was an obsession with machinery and production, and this idea that through machines we could be delivered to these new societies. You know, so you had a competition between the left in the Soviet Union and in parts of Europe, arguing that we could use machinery and technology to kind of reduce people's labor time so that they could go and be free to look at art and literature and do whatever they pleased. And then in in America, which was the heart of capitalism, well, there's lots of capitalist economies, but it was certainly creating new models of production. You had the Ford production line being developed. And so in both left and right wing philosophies at the time, there was this definite emphasis on production and this idea that through the machine we could like deliver to this new society. And as well as that, artists themselves became fascinated with the machine. So we have, you know, Modern Times, the parody of the modern production system by Charlie Chaplin. In the middle, we have this picture here, which is from Metropolis, which is basically a big machine with people working at machines, and when they die, they're thrown into a machine that consumes them, and the process starts all over again. So there's this kind of idea as well, that as well as all this new technology that was liberating us all, it was also dehumanizing us, turning us into things. And I mean, the picture on the right is just one example of this, but every aspect of life was basically reimagined in machine form. Buildings were imagined as machines, cities as machines, the body as a machine. Everything was kind of, the impact of machine modernism was extremely powerful. And I suppose in a way, a machine modernism in different forms still exists today. So, you know, the fact that then this robot becomes the robot becomes a machine absolutely horrified its creator, Karel Capek. He says, and he wrote this in third person for some reason, "It is with horror, frankly, that he rejects all responsibility for the idea that metal contraptions could ever replace human beings, and that by means of wires they could awaken something like life, love and rebellion. He would deem this dark prospect to be either an overestimation of machines or a grave offense against life." You know, so a bit like the character in Frankenstein, you know, Frankenstein creates his monster and he kind of loses control of his monster. Karel Capek was absolutely horrified that his kind of robot was being turned into a machine, and the machine basically started to dominate the imagery of a robot. So I don't know if anyone, I'm sure you all kind of had an idea of a robot being a machine when you came in. So let's have a look at the definitions of a robot. These are just a few. They're quite vague, actually. Robot is taken from the Slavic word robota, which means to work extra, drudgery, extra work. And, but it also is a word for work in Slavic languages with no negative connotations. But the specific meaning that Capek got from the term was related to drudgery. Obviously, because science now kind of reproduces robots, we have a kind of more mechanical, scientific, technological definition. And then also we have a person definition about someone who themselves seem to be lacking in original thought. You know, if we want to criticize someone, we call them a robot. So we think about robots in relation to people and things, and I think we still carry that kind of imagination with us today. So another exciting thing about this talk is it's the 50th anniversary of the first use of industrial robots, and this was it. It's a robot arm. I mean, if you go into some manufacturing companies, not in the UK, unfortunately, but overseas, you'll see lots of robots, particularly in the car industry. And they tend to perform very precise and routine functions. If, for example, the robots are all precisely in place, and the object that they're engaging with also has to be precisely in the same place. And if either of them are out of sync for any reason, then there are problems. But these robots are very effective. I mean, Japan is kind of one of the highest users of robots per industrial worker. And just to say, once again, the GM assembly line was a kind of inspiration for this. And the creators got the idea from science fiction. So it just it shows that fiction has always been an important backdrop for thinking about the technology of robots and artificial intelligence and those kind of themes. And this is a character from 2001 Space Odyssey that everybody knows. And interestingly, when the writers, Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke, were trying to think up this idea, they actually talked to scientists and asked them what the future would be like. You know, in the 1960s, they went to them and they asked, what's the future going to be like in 2001? And they said, well, we're going to have these super advanced artificial intelligent machines like HAL. And I was a bit concerned because the other day I heard about the supercomputer Watson, and I thought, oh my God, you know, maybe they're right. We've arrived here. And then I started to notice a striking comparison. So we're going to talk about Watson, and for those who might not know, Watson was on a show called Jeopardy, and it's created by IBM, and the creators say that it can understand natural language, and therefore it's kind of more super than our current supercomputers.
Well, for 600.
Bang, bang. His silver hammer came down upon her head. Watson.
What is Maxwell's silver hammer?
Yes.
Literary character, APB, for 400.
His victims include Charity Burbage, Mad-Eye Moody, and Severus Snape. He'd be easier to catch if you'd just name him. Brad.
Who is Voldemort?
Correct.
Alternate meaning 600.
Okay, if you want to watch more of that, you can look on YouTube. But Watson did eventually end up winning that competition, which is heralded as this great breakthrough in artificial intelligence. And I'm not diminishing it. I mean, it is an incredible machine. But some things about, like, how did Watson do it? Well, first of all, Watson received the questions in text form. It cannot see or hear, so it has to receive information and communicate it in a very specific way. Responses were based on probability in terms of it had large databases of information, and then it had to search through that database and come up with probable responses. The way that it kind of engaged with the podium was when it decided on an answer, it could like press a buzzer, obviously not the machine, but there was a sequence in place which allowed it to do that. And then it converted the text into a voice answer. So I thought I would search, just Google, and look for these Jeopardy answers myself. And I did this a week ago, and you can do this at home if you've got nothing else better to do. So I literally, Jeopardy works by, you get the answer and you have to guess the question. So I literally put in, just in Google, these three questions. And the first two, I got exactly the same response as Watson did. And the third one, interestingly, I did get hide as the third question, but because Google works by searching for relevant information, now when you search for that phrase, you get the Watson machine. So if you see what I mean. But if you imagine that within Watson's own database banks, it's not contaminated in that sense, like people can skew the results in that kind of way. So, should we fair robots? And I think I'm doing okay for time, so I'll slow down a bit. I was a bit worried there that I was going a bit too fast. So, we have obviously the Terminator image of a robot taking over the world and wreaking havoc and destruction. Now, this kind of idea as well about this kind of character who destroys the world, you can find the origin of that idea back in the earlier play in Rossum's Universal Robot, so if anyone wants to have a read of it. And basically it's set in a future society where robots do all of the human labor, and the humans themselves become lazy and disaffected with life, and there's a particular formula that's developed for a robot. The robot then becomes more superior, and they become powerful because they've got physical strength, and they take over the world. So we can find the roots of this story of kind of robot destruction back in the 1920s. Now, interestingly, when I went to robotic labs and I got there, it was more like a robot crèche than a robot lab. And I didn't really understand the significance of why robots are made in this way before. But actually, the roboticists themselves are so concerned sometimes about the way in which their objects will be accepted in society that they've started recrafting them in particular ways. There's this whole kind of philosophy about how to design robots so that they don't frighten people. One of them is to, if you make them like cute and a bit adorable, then people aren't going to be frightened by them. That's one thing. If you make them more childlike, then people will kind of interact with them like they're small children, and that will mean you don't have to create very intelligent robots because, in my view, people start to do all the work when they interact with them. The other interesting thing about robot design is about whether something's machine-like or human-like. And I'm just going to give you two robots to choose from, and I just want to see a raise of hands. So we have Casper the robot here on the, up here. So that's a very human-like robot, and we have, let's compare it with, I don't know, Mert's robot here. Right, who prefers Casper? Right. Okay, maybe you don't prefer any robot. Who prefers Mert's? You like the doll too? Well, there you go. So already there's kind of judgments that we make about the way that we craft certain objects. And the more human-like they look, the more they tend to freak us out, basically. And the less human-like they look, the more kind of we warm to them. And I've seen this on time and time again, and I think there is some truth to this. It's that in robotics, it's kind of called the uncanny valley. So it's this idea that certain objects, if they look too human-like but they don't behave human-like, they tend to frighten us. And so the way that some roboticists overcome these issues is by designing robots that look very machine-like. Another interesting thing I found in the United States when I did research there is that they tried to make robots genderless and raceless. So this is I didn't find this in the UK actually, but I did find it in America. Like they're very keen on their robotic artifacts kind of being neutral in this respect. But interestingly, even though none of these robots have a gender, who would say they... well, we'll go for a neutral one in the middle, Kismet here. Who thinks Kismet looks like a girl? A few? A boy? More? Neither? About half and half, so they're obviously doing something right. So I'm going to show you a bit of robot video here. And I guess you weren't expecting this when I was going to show you lots of robots, but you'll be very surprised.
のロボットです。これまでと大きく考えを果たし、より人間に近い動きをします。また後ろから肩を触るとちょっとびっくりした感じで誰なのか確かめます。
従来のロボットよりかなり人間に近い。
そう200個のセンサーなどがあり、視覚や聴覚、それに触覚を備えています。人の話し声を聞くとその方向に顔や目線を向けようとします。
Anyway, there you go, robot babies, whatever next. But there is also another kind of as an anthropologist, I'm very kind of interested in this idea why when you go into robotic labs, you find all these like childlike robots, and the way that they're trying to imagine the relationship between robot and person is more like parent and child, carer and child. And you know, anthropologically, I think this is very interesting, and it's almost like developing extending our familial relations, if you like, to non-human things. And I think that some of that plays over and over again in the way in which these robots are designed and the way roboticists talk about them. So, you know, we have the kind of idea of the robot as a destroyer. We have these roboticists who are actually making these research platforms, trying to kind of negate those ideas. But why did Capek's robots lead the way in creating narratives of destruction? And as I said, you know, the robot and the play was written at a very kind of turbulent time. And so Capek thought there was too much obsession on production at the time. That's why his robot is related to the concept of labor. And that's why Marx and Fordism are kind of relevant here. Because Capek saw himself as outside those kind of philosophies, and he didn't want to have a society where everyone was obsessed with production and this machine modernism of the time. So he wrote that he wanted to create this idea that when the robots attacked people, we could think, gosh, isn't it great to be human? Isn't it wonderful to be human? So he kind of had these humanist leanings in that respect. So has his goal come true to some extent? Well, I think robots have always kind of had a place in fiction, and even when they go into domains like science and technology labs and into industry, the fictional aspect never escapes it. It's always there, it's ever present, and therefore it's a kind of technology that's intimately bound up with cultural concepts. So for that reason, we now have robots engaged, you know, technologists building robots that were only first imagined in fiction. Even the term roboticist is from a short story by Isaac Asimov. So even terms that we use in technology are kind of drawn from fiction. And one thing that I've learned in terms of my interactions with lots of different robots and people who make robots is that robots, the making of robots show us how incredible we are as human beings. They really do. Something that we take for granted, like having a simple communication, is extremely complex to reproduce in a machine. And so maybe Capek inadvertently is, you know, is showing us that it's quite incredible to be a human being or an animal. And robots also show how distinctive our characteristics are. And so my recent research has been looking at an area of robotics called social robots, and my new research is looking at therapeutic robots. But interestingly, like even trying to develop a social robot is marked by lots of problems. So I'm going to show you a social robot here.
Do you really think so? 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 Do you really think so?
Right. So this robot is what was called the first sociable robot. It's called Kismet. It was made by researchers at MIT. And as you can see, the idea is that if you have a robot and you get it to express certain facial expressions, then it can communicate a lot of emotion. There's no denying that when we look at that robot, we think it's expressing lots of emotion. However, well, I think there are certain layers of emotion. There's a very kind of simpler way to understanding emotion in terms of behavior, in terms of when I'm surprised, my eyebrows are curved, you know, my nose goes up slightly, and, you know, my eyes widen. But So a lot of these social robots and designing sociable machines, they use these kind of ideas when they're designing them. They think, well, what happens when a person looks surprised? What happens to their face? Maybe we can get the machine to combine those expressions. And then, you know, we've got a robot demonstrating surprise, and the same with happiness, and the same with joy, and all those other things. Well, they don't do joy, but the emotions like sadness, happiness, disgust, surprise are kind of, is the usual emotional range. But I actually think social robots and humanoid robots are a bit of a dead end in robotics. And the reason why is not that I'm particularly against the idea of a humanoid robot, or, you know, I can't you know, engage with an artificially intelligent entity, but I think it's more, they just don't work. If you go to robotic labs, the robots break down, they're too complex, the systems just don't work. And people say, well, isn't this just because of where we are in the technology? Well, I don't just think it's a question about the technology. I think reproducing another person, another human being, should I say, the body and the person in a machine form is just an impossible task. So I don't think the future is in humanoid robots, and I certainly don't think it's in social robots. But I do think it's in other areas, and these are certain areas that I would like to see developing. Obviously not military robots, but you know, these areas have applications. Then we have non-humanoid domestic robots like the Roomba. I think that's a good application for a robot. The Roomba costs about £400, which is why I haven't bought one. And it doesn't do stairs, so you'd have to buy a robot and a Hoover if you wanted to do the whole house, unfortunately. But maybe they'll get around that. Educational robots. I do a lot of outreach work, and children absolutely love robots. So if anyone does outreach work and you're a scientist, children really do get inspired by robots. So that's certainly an area I'd like to see developed. Therapeutic robots. Well, my current research project is looking at the use of robots as potential aids to help children with autism spectrum conditions. And I'll just like give you an idea of what the research is about. It's not about encouraging a child to interact with a robot, but just by having a robot in a room seems to encourage an interaction between child and other participant. So the robot seems to act as a mediator in this respect. And I think that's a very interesting area of research where robotics could develop. But the research on this is all very new at the minute, so nobody really knows if the robot is effective or not. Medical robots, obviously, you know, another area. Already in different kind of research institutes, you're seeing the use of medical robots. And space robots. I mean, I was kind of having a conversation the other day with a friend, and we thought that on the surface of Mars it's probably full of dead robots who have you know, just run out of steam, and but there's still a good way to kind of explore other worlds, other entities out there. So these are areas, I think, in robotics, and I'd like to take my research in the direction of these different types of areas. So I'm going to end it there, but I'm going to show you one last video, and you know, the social robot has, people are imagining that in the future we're going to develop these partnerships with machines, and they could be like companions, for example, for communities like the elderly community, who have often, like, say, one of their biggest problems is loneliness. So there are some people out there who kind of want to kind of develop technologies to be companion species for different groups in society. Now, we don't have enough time to go into the ins and outs of all that, but apart from the video that we often see about robots, and I'm sure there are some scientists here, but I'm sure they will agree that when you see video of robots working it's often robots that have been videotaped a number of times and they've finally done what you wanted them to do. So whenever you see of course be surprised and enjoy it, but when you see robot video, I would say always be a bit cautious because it probably took hundreds of hours to get to that stage. So this is a fantastic robot. It's one of my favorite robots called Merz. And the reason why I like this one is because the researcher, right, decided not to do this, decided not to just put it, you know, videotape it, put the video on the web and like say how great robots were. She actually put her robot in a public space at MIT, and she let people interact with it. And I think this interaction between robot and the people just shows, well, it's quite funny, but it just shows that actually it's not so easy just to create a few facial expressions to engage people in a social interaction. So I'm going to end on there and just show you.
Hello, what is your name?
Oh, no, sorry. This one. I wanted to make it larger, but
Hello, what is your name?
My name is Gauthier, my friend. What is
Your
yours?
name is Jerevo.
Is what?
Yes or no?
No, Gauthier.
Say yes or no, please.
No.
Please look at my face.
He's speaking in French. Are you
Say
speaking
yes
French?
or no?
No.
Hello, what is your name?
Gauthier.
Your name is Karel. Yes or no?
No, it's Marta.
I cannot see you.
I'm here. Hello?
Please look at my face.
What? What did you say?
Please face me directly.
What?
Please face me directly.
So ridiculous.
Answer correctly.
Yeah.
Hello, what is your name?
Marta. And yours?
Do not move too much.
You move too much.
I cannot see you.
Can you see me now? Are you seeing me now?
Please face me directly.
What?
You are too far away.
No, I'm not far away. What do you want? No, don't get
Let's
mad.
go on.
Let's go and talk.
Too many words.
Okay.
Oh, too
I
many
don't
words.
understand any language, but I am trying to learn and repeat simple words you say.
Come closer, please.
So you cannot communicate.
Come closer, please.
Am I close enough?
You are too far away. Come closer, please.
I think he wants to get kissed.
okay, well, just on that, it could have gone on forever, but you can see how much people worked hard to have an interaction with that robot. And I think it's great that the researcher put her work out there, put it in a public space, and let people just interact with it. And I think this probably gives us the best, the most natural and best account of what it's like to interact with a social robot. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. It's a really fantastic subject to explore today. We've about 3 or 4 minutes for questions. If anyone would like to pose a question. We've got 2 microphones on either side of the room, and if you could just hold off till you start speaking until the microphone gets to you. Do we have a question? We've got one here.
This question isn't very well formulated, but I think it's of interest that the idea of a humanoid robot was sort of invented first a long time before there was any possibility of actually having a humanoid robot. And you mentioned the feeling of disgust that we have at an attempt to make a robot humanoid. I mean, that last video was very humorous and comical. But earlier on you mentioned that there is a sort of feeling of disgust if you try to make a robot humanoid. And I think there's probably something deep going on there. I'm inclined to think that a law should be passed saying that you shouldn't be allowed to make robots humanoid. And maybe we should just talk about computerized machines or interactive machines or something of that nature.
Thanks for your question. I don't think there should be laws passed. I mean, technologists should be able to make whatever they like. And what I was kind of saying was that when you build a robot, the more human-like you make it, the more it kind of provokes anxiety in us. So actually, if you created a humanoid that looked very machine-like, people will accept it a little bit more. But then that raises questions about whether you can build a humanoid, whether you should build a humanoid, whether resources should go in that area in robotics. And interestingly, the West is always contrasted with like Japanese societies, and we're told that Japanese people love robots. And I have a Japanese informant who tells me not every household in Japan has a robot. And recently companies have started moving away from humanoids and towards thinking about precisely those things, you know, other type of intelligent agents that could help disabled communities, the elderly, or just, you know, enrich our lives in different ways. And I think there's definitely a move away from the humanoid. It was kind of the 10 years, 2000, 2010. I mean, there are still some humanoids around, but I think we're coming to the end of that now.
Perhaps we could touch a bit more on one aspect that robots of the future will have. First of all, we're talking about very primitive machines there. And your first leader was military robots. There will be a lot of spin-offs of those. One of the things they will do is communicate with each other in networks in a way that we as humans can't. We're limited by our language. We're limited by the speeds of our brains. We are talking potentially about some quite ominous technology. Whether the front end is humanoid or whatever form it takes, I think the important thing to remember is that a network of robots of whatever kind, intelligent robots, would have an amazing form of communication that we can't even envisage. And I think there's a caveat there. To talk about robots taking over the world in the way that science fiction portrays it is probably not what's going to happen. But what could well happen is that they will. Computers have already made us redundant. The pocket calculator made people forget how to do simple calculations in their heads. That was a start. I can see a point where, if we're painting a science fiction, the 1984 caveat, shall we say, of robots is don't let them take over. And we should remember that, because there is that real potential if we're not careful.
So you think they might take over?
Yes, I do, absolutely.
See, I mean, I think what artificial intelligence actually tells us is that machines are very good at doing certain kinds of things. They're very good at doing logical things, mathematical things, things that require search and find, sorting through lots of information. I mean, you know, those kind of things. But when it comes to...
Everything can be defined in mathematical form.
Well, actually, that's... the mathematics of defining this room so you could have a robot navigate the space is extremely complex, and I don't think you could. And even if you could put all the parameters into this room, all that someone has to do is put a chair there, and that's it. Your kind of calculations you know, aren't effective anymore. So I think, I'm not saying there aren't great areas of research. I mean, it's wonderful that some of these interesting developments, and obviously in technology, but you know, I do think it shows how distinctive we are as human beings.